The murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey captivated the nation and put her family under the microscope, with many speculating that her father, mother, brother, or all three were involved in her killing.
How did you feel seeing her?
A lot of sadness. I don't think I really fully grasped, just like, after this, I won't.
It was the day after Christmas, 1996. In a quiet, wealthy neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado, a picture-perfect family was about to be thrown into a national nightmare. Their daughter, a 6-year-old child beauty queen named JonBenet, was missing. Hours later, she wouldn't be found by kidnappers demanding a ransom. She'd be found in the cold, dark basement of her own home, the victim of a brutal murder. In the house that day were her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, and her 9-year-old brother, Burke. While his parents were launched into a storm of suspicion, media frenzies, and legal battles that would last for decades, Burke became a ghost. He was the silent figure in the background, the boy who was in his room while chaos took over downstairs. For nearly 20 years, the world heard nothing from him. He grew up in the shadow of his sister's death, a mystery inside a mystery. What did he see? What did he hear? What's the emotional toll of carrying a burden like that? For decades, he chose privacy, a quiet life away from the relentless glare of the public eye. Then, he decided to talk. This is the story of what happens when the silent brother finally breaks his silence. That he was the boy in the perfect family portrait, the older brother of America's little sweetheart. The next morning, his world was shattered. He was the only other child in the house when his 6-year-old sister was murdered. For 20 years, he didn't say a single public word. And then, he sat down in front of a camera and decided to tell the world what he remembered. What he had to say would captivate a global audience and force everyone to re-examine one of the most infamous cold cases in American history. Before December 26, 1996, the Ramseys seemed to have it all, the embodiment of the American dream. John Ramsey was a successful businessman, the president of a billion-dollar company. His wife, Patsy, was a former Miss West Virginia, a charismatic and devoted mother. They lived in a large, sprawling home in Boulder, Colorado, and were well known in their community. Their children were JonBenet, a bubbly 6-year-old who charmed audiences on the child beauty pageant circuit, and Burke, their 9-year-old son. Christmas in the Ramsey house was, by all accounts, a happy time. The family had gone to a Christmas party on the evening of December 25. They came home, put the kids to bed, and looked forward to a quiet day. But that holiday peace was about to be shattered in the early hours of the next morning. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26, Patsy Ramsey made a frantic 911 call. She told the dispatcher she'd found a 2.5-page ransom note on the back staircase. The note, handwritten on a pad of paper from inside the house, claimed a small foreign faction had kidnapped JonBenet. It demanded the strangely specific sum of $118,000 for her return, a figure that was almost the exact amount of a recent work bonus John Ramsey had received. The first officer on the scene, Rick French, found a situation that would later be heavily criticized. The house wasn't secured as a crime scene. Friends and family were allowed to come and go, potentially contaminating crucial evidence as they tried to comfort the distraught parents. The investigation started as a kidnapping. The FBI was called, and they prepared to follow the instructions in the note, but no kidnapper ever called. As the hours ticked by, a grim feeling began to settle over the house. Late in the afternoon, around 1:30 p.m., a detective, Linda Arndt, asked John Ramsey to do a thorough top-to-bottom search of the house one more time with a friend. John went straight to the basement. There, in a little used wine cellar, he made a horrifying discovery. His daughter, JonBenet, was on the floor, covered by a white blanket. She wasn't just missing, she had been murdered. The details were horrific. A garrote made from a nylon cord and a broken paintbrush handle was tied around her neck. There was duct tape across her mouth. Her wrists were bound. An autopsy would later show the cause of death was strangulation, along with a severe skull fracture. The 8.5-inch fracture on her head was from a violent blow. The kidnapping theory vanished, replaced by a brutal homicide investigation. With no clear signs of forced entry, suspicion almost immediately turned inward, focusing on the only 3 other people known to be in the house: John, Patsy, and their 9-year-old son, Burke. The perfect family portrait was shattered, leaving a dark and complex puzzle that would captivate the public for decades. And at the heart of it all was a silent boy, locked away in his room, as the first chapter of his family's tragedy unfolded. In the chaotic aftermath, the world's attention was fixed on John and Patsy Ramsey. They were grieving parents, but to many, including law enforcement, they were also the primary suspects. Their behavior was scrutinized, their words analyzed. They hired lawyers, gave interviews, and fiercely proclaimed their innocence against a rising tide of public suspicion. But what about Burke? Where was the 9-year-old boy in all of this? According to Burke, he spent most of that morning in his bedroom. He remembers being woken by his mother, Patsy, who burst into his room in a frantic search for JonBenet, freaking out and running around. But even as police and family friends filled the house downstairs, Burke stayed put. He heard the muffled sounds of chaos, but he didn't leave his room. Years later, he explained this with a simple, telling statement: "I guess I kind of like to avoid conflict. I guess I just felt safer there." He was scared, not knowing if a bad guy was downstairs. This reaction set a pattern for the next 2 decades of his life. As the investigation spiraled into a massive media circus, Burke retreated further. He later said, "For a long time, the media made our lives crazy. It was hard to miss the cameras and new trucks in your front yard." He remembered seeing his and his sister's faces on tabloid magazines at the supermarket, calling it a chaotic nightmare that made him a very private person. While his parents fought a public war to clear their names, they also fought a private battle to protect their son. They tried to shield him from the media, to give him some semblance of a normal childhood. In 1997, the family left Boulder and moved to a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, hoping to escape the constant scrutiny, but the shadow of the case followed them. Speculation was rampant, with some theories pointing directly at the 9-year-old boy. The pineapple theory became a staple of internet forums. It suggested that Burke, angry with JonBenet over a piece of pineapple found in her stomach during the autopsy, had hit and killed her in a fit of rage, and that his parents then staged the kidnapping to cover it up. This theory, never backed by hard evidence, took on a life of its own, fed by the vacuum of Burke's silence. The family has always denied these claims. In 1999, the district attorney publicly stated that Burke Ramsey was not a suspect, pointing out that the crime's violence and the complex ransom note were beyond a 9-year-old's abilities. Still, the rumors persisted. The family filed lawsuits against media outlets that implicated Burke. Meanwhile, Burke navigated his teens and young adulthood under this dark cloud. He managed to live a relatively anonymous life, graduating from Purdue University in 2009 with a degree in computer technology and working as a software engineer, which allowed him to work remotely. In 2006, Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer, never seeing justice for her daughter. 2 years later, in 2008, there was a major development. The Boulder District Attorney's Office announced that new touch DNA testing had found DNA from an unknown male on JonBenet's clothing. This DNA didn't match anyone in the Ramsey family, including Burke. The DA at the time, Mary Lacey, sent a formal letter of apology to John Ramsey, stating the new evidence cleared him, his late wife, and his son. For many, this should have ended the suspicion. But in a case this sensational, facts often struggle against years of public opinion. The exoneration didn't silence all the whispers. And through it all, the theories, the accusations, and the eventual exoneration, Burke Ramsey remained silent. For 20 years, the world speculated about the boy in the room, but the boy himself said nothing. His long, self-imposed silence only made people wonder more. For 20 years, silence was his shield. It was a wall he built to protect himself from a world that had turned his family's tragedy into a public spectacle. But as the 20th anniversary of JonBenet's death neared in 2016, the media frenzy reignited. New documentaries were planned, old theories were rehashed, and the spotlight was swinging back to the Ramsey family. Burke, now 29, was at a crossroads. He knew his anonymity was disappearing and that his story would be told, with or without him. That's when he made a decision that shocked everyone. After 2 decades of refusing all media requests, he sat down for an exclusive interview with Dr. Phil McGraw. He explained his reasoning simply: if the story is going to be told, I want to tell it. I don't want people talking about me. I would rather tell my own story. He also wanted to honor his sister's memory. The world leaned in. The silent brother was finally going to speak. What would he reveal? He recounted his memories of December 26, 1996, describing waking up to his mother's frantic cries and staying in his room out of fear. One of the most emotional moments was when he described learning of his sister's death. "My dad told me JonBenet is in heaven now," Burke recalled, "and he started crying, then I started crying. I was kind of like, how is this possible? I don't think I said anything. I didn't believe it at first." However, it wasn't just what he said, but how he said it that became a subject of intense debate. Throughout the interview, even when discussing the darkest details, Burke often had a nervous, unsettling smile. This effect, as Dr. Phil called it, was immediately seen by many as a sign of guilt. Dr. Phil offered a different take, explaining that Burke was a very socially awkward young man. He argued that Burke hadn't had a normal social upbringing due to the media harassment and had grown up isolated. He suggested the smiling wasn't dishonesty but a coping mechanism for severe social anxiety. Burke was adamant in his denials. He firmly stated he did not harm his sister and that his parents weren't involved. When asked who he thought was responsible, his theory was clear: an intruder, specifically a pedophile from the pageant circuit, who might have seen JonBenet at an event. The interview also showed never-before-seen interrogation tapes of Burke as a child, which he watched for the first time with Dr. Phil. Did the interview solve the case? No. Burke offered no smoking gun. But it did replace the ghostly figure of the brother with a real, complex, and damaged human being. It was a raw look at the psychological toll of growing up at the center of a world-famous unsolved crime. The silence was broken, not with a bombshell, but with the complicated, awkward, and painful story of a survivor. Breaking 20 years of silence was a huge step for Burke Ramsey, but it wasn't the end of his story. The 2016 Dr. Phil interview marked a turning point. The boy who hid from the world had become a man willing to fight back, not just with words, but with lawsuits. Shortly after his interview, CBS released a documentary series, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey. In it, a panel of experts pushed the theory that Burke had accidentally killed his sister in a fit of rage and his parents covered it up. This was the same speculation that had haunted his family for years, now. Presented in a primetime special, this time, Burke took the lead. He filed a massive $750 million defamation lawsuit against CBS and one of the forensic pathologists from the show. The lawsuit argued the series had knowingly and falsely accused him of a horrible crime. This was a dramatic shift for the private, conflict-averse man. In 2019, the lawsuit was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. This legal victory allowed Burke to reclaim some control over his story. Since the interview and lawsuit, he has retreated from the spotlight again. Now in his late 30s, he lives a quiet life, working in software engineering. According to family, he has no interest in reliving the trauma and avoids seeing anything about the case on TV. Meanwhile, the fight for justice for JonBenet continues, now led by his father, John Ramsey. Now in his 80s, John relentlessly pressures the Boulder Police Department to use the latest DNA technology to solve the case. He's been a vocal advocate for using genetic genealogy to analyze the unknown male DNA found at the scene. The Boulder police maintain the investigation is active and they're using all available technology, but the pace has frustrated the Ramsey family. John says he wants the cloud of suspicion removed from his family's name for his children and grandchildren. The case remains unsolved. More than 28 years have passed, and no one has been charged with JonBenet Ramsey's murder. Burke's decision to speak out in 2016 was a singular act of self-defense and remembrance. He said what he needed to, fought the battles he had to, and then returned to the quiet life he always wanted. The JonBenet Ramsey case is filled with theories, from an intruder to family members. After hearing about Burke's experience and the evidence, what do you believe happened that night? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. For nearly 3 decades, the ghost of JonBenet Ramsey has haunted the American psyche. It's a case that has everything: a tragic victim, a wealthy family, a flawed investigation, and endless unanswered questions. At the center of this storm for so long stood a silent figure, her brother, Burke. For 20 years, he was a blank slate for public suspicion and fear. His decision to finally break that silence didn't solve the crime. Instead, it added a new layer of complexity, forcing us to confront the human cost of living under a perpetual cloud of suspicion. We saw a man shaped by trauma, socially awkward and struggling to tell his story under the brightest of spotlights. His story is a powerful reminder that the victims of a crime aren't just the deceased, the survivors often carry a lifelong burden. Today, Burke Ramsey lives a quiet life, shielded from the media he believes tormented his family. The case of who killed his sister remains open, a wound that won't close for his family or for a public that remains captivated by its mystery. While his father continues the public fight for justice, Burke's journey seems to be about finding personal peace. He broke his silence to reclaim his own story, honor his sister, and finally give a voice to the boy who was in the room, a voice that, after all those years, was finally his own.